The Piano of Lost Love by Amelia Winters. Chapter 1. The Return. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet streets of her hometown. Clara stood at the edge of the village, the familiar sights and sounds of her childhood slowly unfolding before her, though softened by the haze of time. The trees lining the main street were taller now, their branches heavy with the weight of years, their leaves whispering in the breeze like an old secret being passed from one generation to the next. Her fingers brushed the delicate surface of the iron gate, cold to the touch as it had always been, though it had been decades since she had last stood here. The gate creaked open with a sigh, as though it too remembered the sound of her footsteps. Clara stepped through, her heart fluttering with the weight of 1,000 unspoken thoughts. It had been too long, so long that the memories of this place had almost slipped away, only to be revived by the faintest of impressions, the scent of earth after rain, the rustle of leaves, the quiet hum of the piano that once filled the air with music. The house before her was a quiet, weathered thing now. The paint had chipped from the windowsills, and ivy climbed up the walls like a living tapestry. The garden, which had once been filled with a riot of colors from her mother's flowers, was now overgrown, the once pristine paths hidden beneath a blanket of wild grass. Yet, even in its decay, there was a certain beauty to it, a kind of melancholy that matched the tone of her heart. Clara hesitated for a moment before crossing the threshold of the door, her hand pausing just above the brass knob. She could almost hear the music again, the melody that had once played so effortlessly on her piano. She had left this place with nothing but echoes of that music in her heart, the unfinished symphony of her youth. But now, standing here, everything was different. The years had passed, the piano had fallen silent, and yet something deep within her stirred, a longing, a pull to return, to remember. The door opened with a soft creak, and Clara stepped into the familiar hallway. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and aged wood, but beneath it there was something else, a faint trace of perfume, of roses and vanilla, a memory so fragile it could almost break if touched too roughly. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the scent wash over her, and for a brief instant it was as though she had never left. She had once lived here, once played here, her fingers dancing over the keys of the grand piano that sat by the window, the sun streaming through the glass, casting golden light over the polished wood. She could still remember the sound of the music, the way it had filled every corner of the room, creating a space where nothing else existed but the harmony between her and the piano. Clara moved toward the sitting room, where the piano had once stood, her heart quickening with each step. As she entered the room, she stopped short. There, in the corner of the room, beneath a thick layer of dust, stood the piano. The keys, though yellowed with age, still held the promise of melody, as if waiting for her touch. It was a haunting sight, this silent witness to a past she had tried so hard to forget. She ran her fingers gently over the surface, tracing the outlines of the keys, as though they could still offer her some solace, some way to reach back to that time when music had been her voice and love had been her song. But no sound came. The piano was still, its notes trapped within the wooden frame, unable to speak. Her eyes fell to the sheet music resting on the stand. The pages were yellowed and frayed, but one melody stood out, one song that had once been their song. Clara's heart tightened in her chest as the memories came flooding back, each note like a shard of glass, cutting through the years and bringing her to that summer, the summer when she had first met him. His name echoed in her mind, Samuel. They had been young, both of them, their hearts untouched by the harshness of the world. She had been the pianist, and he, the violinist, two souls intertwined by the music they created together. They had spent countless hours in this very room, crafting melodies, their fingers finding harmony as their hearts began to beat in time with the music. They had been perfect, or so she had believed, but life, as it often does, had other plans. Clara closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her, the sound of the violin and the piano weaving together in the air, a symphony of first love, of innocence, of hope. It had been the most beautiful music she had ever known. But like all things beautiful, it had slipped away, lost to the currents of time. Samuel had left, and the piano had fallen silent, and with it, her heart. She stood there for a long time, lost in the past, before she finally turned away from the piano and wandered deeper into the house. Each room seemed to hold another piece of her history: faded photographs on the walls, the old clock that had once chimed on the hour, the worn armchair where she had spent hours reading, waiting for a return that never came. It was in the silence of the house, in the absence of sound, that Clara realized how much she had changed. The girl who had once played so effortlessly, her heart wide open, had been replaced by a woman who had learned to guard her emotions, to keep her heart locked away, far from the reach of anyone, least of all the man who had once held it in his hands. But here, in this house, in this room, the music still lingered, and Clara knew without a doubt that she had returned to face it. She had come back to uncover the pieces of herself that she had buried all these years, to find the melody that had once defined her, and perhaps to finally let it go. The past was a fragile thing, delicate and fleeting, but Clara knew it had a power all its own. She would find the music again, even if it meant facing the love that had once consumed her, the love she had lost, and the love that might still remain, waiting to be rediscovered. Clara glanced back at the piano, her fingers itching to play. But for now, she stood still, listening to the quiet as the memories began to unfold, one note at a time. Chapter 2: The Silent Melody. The morning sun filtered softly through the lace curtains of Clara's childhood bedroom, casting delicate shadows across the floor. It was a room frozen in time, unchanged save for the gentle wear of age. The soft blue wallpaper, dotted with floral patterns, still clung to the walls, the same wallpaper she had stared at as a child when sleep had eluded her. There, beneath the window, was the small desk where she had written letters, practiced her scales, and daydreamed of a world beyond this sleepy village. Clara lingered in the room for a long time, lost in the quiet hum of the house. The world outside seemed so distant, as if it had paused in anticipation of something yet to come. The memories that clung to the air were like threads, pulling her deeper into the past, each one leading to another, weaving a tapestry of moments long forgotten. She sat down at the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing against the frayed edges of the quilt that had once been her mother's work. It was a piece of home, a symbol of a time when life had been simpler, when love had been enough to hold everything together. Clara's eyes flickered to the small piano in the corner, the one she had spent so many hours playing, its silent presence now like an unspoken invitation. The house was still and empty, save for Clara. Her parents had long since passed, and the town itself had moved on, its people scattering to new lives in faraway places. Yet, as she sat in this room, she could feel the weight of their absence, the hollow space they had left behind. It was in the way the dust settled on every surface, in the way the air held its breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the stillness. Clara's gaze fell to the photograph on the nightstand, one she had almost forgotten. It was an old black and white portrait of her and Samuel, taken in the small park near the town square. They were both young, their faces alight with a joy so pure, so unguarded. Samuel's arm was draped over her shoulders, his smile as wide as hers. She had been 17 then, her world still full of possibility, untouched by the scars of time. The photograph brought with it a flood of memories, of afternoons spent by the river, the music they had created together, the laughter that had filled the air like birdsong. Samuel had always had a way of making her feel seen, understood, as if they were the only two people in the world who mattered. His presence had been a balm to her restless heart, a promise of something eternal, and for a while it had been enough. But then, as time has a way of doing, everything had unraveled. The melodies they created together had faded, replaced by the silence of unspoken words and unfinished symphonies. Samuel had left, and Clara had been left behind, the echoes of their music the only reminder of what they had once shared. She picked up the photograph carefully, as though handling something fragile. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the outline of Samuel's face, the memory of his warmth still lingering in her touch. It had been years since she had seen him, since she had last heard the sound of his violin harmonizing with her piano. So much had changed, and yet the memory of him remained, untouched, unyielding. Clara placed the photograph back on the nightstand and stood up, the weight of nostalgia heavy in her chest. She moved toward the door, her footsteps soft on the worn floorboards. The house was calling her, pulling her toward the past, as if it were a living thing, waiting for her to uncover what had been lost. Outside, the garden stretched out before her, the once vibrant flowers now wilted and overgrown, their colors dulled by the passing years. The familiar path to the riverbank was obscured by the wild growth, but Clara knew the way. She had walked this path countless times as a child, her feet bare against the cool earth, the sound of the river lapping at the shore like a lullaby. She stepped outside, the air fresh and tinged with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Her heart quickened as she made her way down the path, each step bringing her closer to the place where she had once found solace in the music. The river, which had once felt like a constant companion, was now distant, its flow slow and steady, a quiet murmur beneath the canopy of trees. Clara reached the riverbank, her eyes scanning the familiar landscape. It was here, so many years ago, that she and Samuel had spent their afternoons. The sound of his violin had mingled with the rustling of leaves, the melodies flowing like the water itself, effortless and free. She could almost hear it now, the faintest strains of music carried on the wind. She closed her eyes and listened, her breath steady and deep. For a moment, she was transported back to that time, the summer when everything had felt infinite. The world had been full of possibility, of dreams that had seemed just within reach. She had been so young, so certain that their love would last forever, that the music would never fade. But time, as it does, had a way of pulling everything apart, piece by piece. Samuel had gone away, and Clara had stayed behind, left to grapple with the silence that followed. The music they had shared had died with him, leaving only the ghost of a song she could no longer play. She knelt by the river, her fingers brushing against the cool water. It was as though the river, too, had aged, its flow slower than she remembered, its edges softened by time. Yet there was something comforting in the way it moved, its persistence, its quiet strength. It had always been there, just as the memories of Samuel had been, waiting for her to return, waiting for her to find the rhythm again. The river had never forgotten, and neither had she. Clara stood up slowly, her eyes lingering on the water as it glided past her, carrying with it the past, the present, and, perhaps, the future. She had come back to this place for a reason. The music was still there, buried beneath the layers of time and loss. She could feel it in the air, in the earth beneath her feet, in the river's steady flow. The melody was waiting to be heard again. And this time, Clara would listen. Chapter 3. The First Note. The days passed slowly, each one a quiet step forward into the past. Clara found herself drawn back to the piano, the once still instrument now calling to her like a forgotten song. Each morning she would wander through the house, touching things she had once loved, the family heirlooms, the worn books on the shelves, the faded tapestries that had hung in the dining room. But it was the piano that called to her most of all. It was as though the keys, still waiting beneath the thick layer of dust, held the answers to everything. She had not touched them yet, not in a way that mattered, but each time she stood before the instrument, her fingers itched to play, to unlock something long buried, something that had been sealed away with Samuel's departure. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the room in soft golden light, Clara stood before the piano once more. Her fingers hovered over the ivory keys, trembling slightly. The silence between them felt thick, almost suffocating, as though the piano had waited for her to return, but was unsure if it should forgive her for leaving it behind for so long. Clara closed her eyes, remembering the touch of Samuel's hand on her shoulder as they sat together at the piano. He had always been the one to start the music, to coax the first note from the keys, as if the melody was a secret he alone knew. She had followed him, her fingers finding their place beside his, creating something greater than either of them alone could have. They had made their own symphony, their own world. But now there was no Samuel beside her, no violin to guide the melody, just the silence. She pressed her fingers gently to the keys, a soft, hesitant sound emerging from the piano. It was a simple note, but it was enough to break the stillness. Clara exhaled slowly, feeling the warmth of the music wrap around her like an old, familiar embrace. She played again, her fingers flowing more confidently this time, the notes filling the air like the first raindrops after a long drought. The melody was faint, almost timid at first, but it grew with every note. She could feel it, like a memory slipping through her fingertips. The song she had once known so well, the one she had created with Samuel, was beginning to emerge from the depths of her heart. She played slowly, feeling each note as if it were an echo of the past, each chord a conversation with a lost love, a love she had never truly let go of. The melody was fragmented at first, pieces of forgotten moments, whispers of a time when everything had seemed perfect. It was the song they had composed together in the heat of summer, the one they had vowed would never end. But it had ended. Samuel had gone away, leaving Clara with nothing but the music and the silence. She pressed on, though, determined to reclaim what had once been hers. Slowly, the fragments began to take shape, the melody growing clearer with each passing moment. Clara's hands moved more fluidly now, the music flowing from her like a river finding its course. She closed her eyes again, and in that moment, the room around her seemed to dissolve. It was just her and the music, the piano, and the memory of Samuel. The song began to fill the air like a presence, like he was there with her, playing beside her once again. But it was only an illusion, a beautiful, fleeting illusion. Clara stopped suddenly, her hands resting on the keys, her breath shallow. The music had become too real, too vivid. She could almost see him there beside her, his fingers brushing against hers as they played together. For a moment, she had felt the warmth of his presence again, the bond they had shared. Her heart ached, a deep, aching longing that seemed to come from the very core of her being. She missed him. She missed the music. She missed the way they had been so perfectly in sync, their hearts beating as one, their souls bound together in the music they created. She opened her eyes, blinking against the tears that had gathered at the corners of her vision. It had been so long since she had allowed herself to feel this way, to grieve for what she had lost. But the music, the piano, it had brought it all rushing back. Clara stood up from the piano bench, her hands trembling as she wiped the tears away. She couldn't stay here, not in this place where every note reminded her of what had been, not when the music felt like both a gift and a curse. She walked away from the piano, her footsteps echoing in the stillness of the room. She stepped into the hallway, letting the cool air brush against her face as she moved toward the door. The house felt suffocating now, the walls closing in around her, the memories pressing in like a weight she could no longer bear. Outside, the sky was overcast, the clouds heavy with the promise of rain. Clara walked through the garden again, her feet moving on autopilot as she crossed the familiar path to the riverbank. She needed to escape, to feel the cool breeze on her face, to clear her mind of the music that still lingered in her thoughts. She needed to breathe. The river, though, was still the same. Its surface rippled in the gentle breeze, the water moving with the same steady rhythm it always had. Clara knelt down at the water's edge, her hands resting on the smooth stones beneath her. She watched as the water carried leaves and twigs downstream, their delicate forms drifting lazily by, untouched by the world around them. It was then that she heard it. A faint sound carried on the wind, the softest of melodies. It was distant at first, barely audible, but Clara recognized it instantly. The same tune, the one she and Samuel had once played together. Her heart raced as she stood up, her eyes scanning the riverbank. Had she imagined it? Or was the music really there? She turned, looking up the path that led back to the house, but there was no one in sight, only the trees, the wildflowers, and the river. Yet the music lingered in the air, as though it were something alive, something that had not been forgotten. Clara took a deep breath, her hands trembling once more. The melody was still with her like a whisper from the past, a reminder that some things, no matter how much time passed, could never truly be lost. The song was waiting for her, and perhaps for the first time in years, she was ready to listen. Chapter 4: The Return of the Song. The rain came gently at first, a soft patter against the window panes, but it quickly grew heavier, drumming on the roof and the ground outside. Clara had retreated inside, though the storm outside seemed to echo the turbulence that churned within her. The music, the memories still lingered, a haunting, unshakable presence that wrapped itself around her like a cloak. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear Samuel's violin, so clear, so vivid. She had stepped away from the piano, but now, sitting in the dim light of the parlor, Clara found herself drawn back to it. She could feel the pull, like a gentle tug at her heart, as if the instrument itself had been waiting for her. The house was quiet, save for the rain and the distant thunder, but Clara's mind was anything but peaceful. The past seemed to swirl around her, threatening to overwhelm her. She rose slowly, her steps deliberate as she crossed the room to where the piano sat. Its silent presence seemed less intimidating now, almost comforting, as though it understood the weight of her hesitation. She stood before it for a long time, her fingers hovering over the keys. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, but Clara remained still, her gaze fixed on the piano as if seeking permission to continue. The memories of Samuel came rushing back in waves, each one carrying its own weight. The way he had smiled when she played the first note of their song, the way his eyes had brightened as they created something together, something that felt like it would last forever. The music had been their language, their connection, a bond stronger than words, more enduring than time. But it had been broken, not by any fault of their own, but by the force of life, which had a way of pulling people apart when they least expected it. Clara pressed her fingers to the keys. The sound was soft at first, tentative, but then it grew, filling the room with the delicate strains of the melody. It was the same song. No, not just the same song, but the very same notes they had played together, notes that had once carried their hopes, their dreams, and their love. She had not forgotten them, even if she had tried to. The music poured from her as though it had always been there, waiting patiently for her to rediscover it. She played slowly at first, as though testing the waters, but the more she played, the more confident she became. The melody flowed through her fingers, effortless and familiar, as though the piano itself had been waiting for her to return, just as she had been waiting for the music. The storm outside raged on, but Clara did not notice it. She was lost in the music, lost in the song that had once belonged to them both. Her fingers moved more freely now, each note a conversation between the past and the present, each chord a bridge between the person she had been and the person she was becoming. The song had a life of its own, growing and evolving as she played, filling the room with the sound of what could have been, what might still be. And then, as Clara played, a thought began to form, slowly, tentatively, at the edge of her mind. What if the music was not just a memory? What if it was something more? What if it was a path, leading her somewhere, leading her back to him? She paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. The thought unsettled her. Could the music truly bring him back? Could it be the key to unearthing what had been buried for so long? The rational part of her, her mind, ever the skeptic, wanted to dismiss it. But the heart whispered something else. Before she could stop herself, Clara played the first note again, the same one they had begun with so many years ago. It was the beginning of something, the beginning of a conversation that had never quite ended. The music wrapped itself around her like an embrace, tender and reassuring, as though Samuel's presence had never really left. The rain outside had intensified, the sound of it now a steady roar. Clara's heart quickened as the music built, rising and falling in time with her breath. The notes seemed to form shapes in her mind, patterns that she recognized but couldn't quite grasp. She had always been the one to follow Samuel's lead, to match his pace, his rhythm. But now it was her turn. The piano was hers to command, and yet, as she played, it felt as though the music was leading her. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to be carried by the sound. The room, the world, everything around her faded away. It was just her and the music, the melody that had lived inside her for so long, waiting to be awakened. Then a sudden thought struck her, a realization that hit her like a bolt of lightning. Samuel. Where had he gone? Why had he left? The questions, once buried under layers of time and hurt, came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. She had never really asked those questions. She had never allowed herself to. She had accepted his departure as one accepts a storm, something that happens, something that must be endured. But now, as the music swelled around her, Clara felt a shift. There was more to it, so much more that she had been unwilling to face. The melody faltered, and Clara's fingers stilled on the keys. She sat there for a moment, breathless, the weight of the realization settling heavily on her chest. Samuel's departure had not been an accident. It had not been the work of time or distance. Something had happened, something that had torn them apart in ways she had never fully understood. The music they had shared, the love they had nurtured, had been severed by something darker than she had ever allowed herself to believe. Clara stood up abruptly, her heart racing. She couldn't stay here anymore, trapped in the quiet despair of her memories. The music, the storm, everything felt like it was closing in on her, pushing her toward something she wasn't sure she was ready to face. She needed answers, and to find them, she would have to confront the past, not just the beautiful parts, but the painful, hidden ones. With a final glance at the piano, Clara moved toward the door. The rain continued to fall, but the path ahead felt clearer now, even if it was shrouded in uncertainty. The music had led her here, but it would be her own courage that would carry her forward. The song had returned. Now it was time to uncover its full story. Chapter 5: The Forgotten Letters. Clara's footsteps echoed in the empty hall as she moved through the house, the walls lined with faded photographs, mementos of a life that had once been whole, once been filled with laughter and warmth. The air was thick with the scent of dust, of years untouched, of memories locked away behind doors she had long forgotten to open. But now each step felt like a summons, an invitation to uncover the past, to uncover what she had been so afraid to face. She had never returned to this house after all these years. Not once. It wasn't just the distance, nor the passing of time. No, it was the weight of the memories that had kept her away. The sight of this place, the sight of what had once been so full of life, of promise, had felt too painful, too raw. But now, standing in the familiar hall, it felt different. The air felt heavy with the need to discover, to untangle the knots she had tied in her heart. She made her way to the study, where she remembered the old leather-bound journals and letters stacked high on the shelves. Samuel's letters. She hadn't seen them in decades, but she could still picture their delicate handwriting, the faint scent of ink, and the way the paper crinkled beneath her fingers when she first read them. They had once been her lifeline, her connection to him during the long days of separation, when they had been forced to live without the music, without each other. But somewhere along the way, even those letters had been abandoned, forgotten. Clara reached the study, the door creaking open as she stepped inside. The room was exactly as she remembered, dimly lit, with a large oak desk in the center, and shelves lined with books, their spines faded from years of neglect. Her eyes swept across the room, searching for something, anything that might tell her where to begin. And then, in the corner of the room, a small wooden chest caught her eye. She had never noticed it before, or perhaps she had simply never thought to look. Her heart beat faster as she approached it, each step measured and deliberate. The chest seemed out of place, its polished wood gleaming in the dim light, untouched by the years of dust and decay that had settled on everything else in the room. She knelt beside it, her fingers trembling slightly as she ran them over the latch. There was no lock, just a simple clasp, and when she opened it, a rush of memories flooded her. Inside, the chest was filled with neatly folded letters, Samuel's letters. She recognized the delicate script immediately, the curves of his handwriting, the way he had always poured his heart into every word. And there, beneath the letters, was a small, old-fashioned music box. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she picked it up. It was the same one he had given her on her 18th birthday, a gift wrapped in the kind of quiet sentimentality he had always had. She hadn't realized it had been here, stored away, tucked beneath the letters as though forgotten. But Clara knew better. Samuel had never been one to forget. Not about things that mattered, not about her. With trembling hands, she set the music box on the desk and wound it. The familiar tune began to play, soft and lilting, the same song they had created together all those years ago. It was a melody that had stayed with her, embedded in the deepest corners of her soul. The tune seemed to echo in the stillness of the room, filling the space with its sweet, melancholy notes. It was as if time had collapsed, and she was suddenly transported back to a time when everything had seemed possible, when she and Samuel had been inseparable, their hearts beating in sync with the rhythm of their music. As the last note of the melody played, Clara's hand hovered over the letters. She could feel the weight of them, the weight of a history she had been running from for so long. It was time to read the words she had never dared to read, the words that might hold the answers to the questions she had buried deep within her. She pulled the top letter from the stack, its edges slightly yellowed with age, and unfolded it. The paper was fragile beneath her fingertips, but the words on it were clear, as if Samuel had written them only yesterday. My dearest Clara, I write this letter with a heart full of both joy and sorrow, for I know that this will be the last time I can express myself in this way. The circumstances have changed, and I find myself at a crossroads. You have been the music in my life, the melody that has played in my heart since the day we first met. But life is not as simple as the songs we create. There are things beyond our control, things that we must face, even if they tear us apart. I know you will read these words and wonder why. Why did I not tell you sooner? Why did I leave? The answer is complicated, and I fear you may never fully understand. But I must go, for both our sakes. There are things I cannot explain, things that will hurt you if I try. All I can do is ask you to forgive me, to carry the music with you always. Perhaps one day you will understand why I had to leave. Yours always, Samuel. Clara's fingers trembled as she set the letter down. The words burned into her mind, each sentence an echo of a pain she had never fully realized, a pain she had pushed to the back of her heart in order to survive. Samuel had left, not because of love, but because of something else, something beyond their control. But what had it been? What had torn them apart? She reached for another letter, her heart pounding in her chest. As she unfolded it, another wave of emotion hit her, this one deeper, darker. Clara, I am sorry. I know the words I wrote before must have hurt you, but I had no choice. There are forces at play in my life that I cannot escape. You have to understand, my leaving was never a choice I wanted to make. It was a decision made for me, a decision I had no power over. I cannot tell you why, not now, but I swear to you, it is not because I stopped loving you. Never that. I hope that one day you will find it in your heart to forgive me. And when you do, maybe we will meet again and we can play our song once more. Until then, remember that you are always with me in the music we shared. Yours always, Samuel. Clara pressed the letter to her chest, her breath catching in her throat. There was so much he had not said, so much left unsaid between them. But there was one thing that had remained constant, the music. It had never left her, not truly. And now, as she sat in the study surrounded by the remnants of their past, Clara realized that perhaps the answers she sought were hidden not in the words, but in the music itself. The song they had created together, the song that had bound them so tightly, was calling her back. Perhaps, just perhaps, it held the key to understanding everything. With renewed determination, Clara stood, the letters still clenched in her hands. She could no longer stay here, surrounded by memories. She needed to find him. She needed to know the truth. The piano awaited her, just as it always had. And this time she would not shy away from the melody. She would face it. Chapter 6: The Reprise. The sun hung low in the sky as Clara drove through the winding roads that led out of town, the landscape sprawling in shades of gold and deep green. The road was quiet, just as it had been all those years ago when she and Samuel had driven down these very paths, their hearts full of youthful promise, their dreams untainted by time. She could still feel the hum of the car's engine beneath her, the crisp air rushing through the open windows, and the sound of Samuel's voice, soft and steady beside her. But now the road felt different. It was no longer filled with the warmth of shared laughter and music. It was cold, empty, as if the world itself had forgotten the joy they had once shared. Clara's grip on the steering wheel tightened, and she forced herself to focus on the path ahead. There was no turning back, no more retreating into the past. The letters, the music, the memories, all of them had led her here, to this moment, to this town that had witnessed both the beginnings and the endings of her most cherished love. The town was nestled at the edge of a valley, a place that felt like a forgotten corner of the world, untouched by the rush of time. The houses, with their ivy-covered walls and winding pathways, seemed to whisper of another age, of lives lived and lost. Clara drove through the narrow streets, her heart heavy with anticipation, knowing that Samuel's presence lingered here, as real as the air she breathed. She had found the address in the old letters, an address she hadn't thought to remember, an address that had once been a distant dream. But now it was a destination, a place she knew she had to reach. The old church stood before her, its tall spire reaching toward the heavens as if to touch the sky itself. Clara parked the car beneath the shade of a nearby tree and sat for a moment, her breath coming in shallow bursts. The church had not changed, its stone walls as weathered as the memories that clung to it. She could almost hear the echoes of their footsteps from years ago, the soft music of Samuel's piano filtering through the air as they had sat together in this very place, dreaming of a future that was never to be. With a sigh, Clara gathered her things and stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched beneath her feet as she walked toward the church, the weight of the years pressing down on her with every step. She hesitated for a moment at the door, her hand hovering over the handle as if afraid to enter. But then she turned the handle, and the door opened with a soft groan. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and the faint smell of incense. The church was silent, save for the distant sound of a bell ringing from somewhere far above. The pews, once filled with parishioners, stood empty now, their polished surfaces gleaming in the dim light that filtered through the stained glass windows. The light seemed to dance upon the floor, casting colorful shadows that shifted with the movement of the sun. Clara's eyes swept over the interior, searching for something, anything, that would guide her to the answer she had been seeking. And there, in the far corner of the room, was a figure, a silhouette bathed in the soft glow of the afternoon sun. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. It was him. Samuel sat at the old, weathered piano, his hands resting lightly on the keys. His hair was darker now, streaked with silver at the temples, and the years had carved deeper lines into his face. But his presence, the way he sat there with such quiet grace, was unmistakable. Clara's heart raced, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She had not expected this, had not expected him to be here in this place after all these years. Clara, his voice was soft, like a whisper carried on the wind. She took a step forward, her legs trembling beneath her. Samuel. His gaze met hers, and for a brief moment, time seemed to slow. All the years between them, all the miles, all the pain, they fell away, leaving only the connection that had never truly been severed. "I thought you might come," he said, his voice tinged with both sadness and relief. Clara took another step closer, unable to speak, unable to put into words the flood of emotions that surged within her. She had so many questions, so many things she wanted to ask him, but in that moment, nothing else mattered but the fact that he was here, in front of her, alive and real. "Why did you leave?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes searching his for the answers that had eluded her for so long. Samuel's fingers hovered over the piano keys, and for a moment he said nothing. His gaze drifted to the windows, as though lost in the same memories that had haunted her for years. "Because I had to," he replied quietly. "There were things I couldn't control, Clara. Things that were bigger than us, bigger than our love. You have to understand, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to leave you." Clara's chest tightened, the weight of his words sinking in. "But you didn't tell me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You didn't explain. You just disappeared." "I know," Samuel said softly. "I should have. But I thought if I told you, if I explained everything, you would have only suffered more. I couldn't bear to see that happen." Clara closed her eyes, her hand pressing against her heart as the years of heartache, of unanswered questions, flooded back. "I spent so many years wondering what I did wrong, why you left, why you didn't come back. I thought I was the one who had failed, but now I see. It wasn't me, was it? It was something else, something I could never have known." Samuel's gaze softened, and he rose from the piano bench, taking a cautious step toward her. "No, Clara, it was never you. It was me. I was caught up in things that I couldn't escape from, and in the end, I had to let go of everything, even you. But you were always in my heart. You always will be." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she reached for him, her hand trembling. "I never stopped loving you, Samuel. I never stopped waiting." He reached out, his hand brushing hers, and for a moment they stood there in silence, the years of separation melting away like the fading sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. And then, as if by unspoken agreement, Samuel sat back down at the piano. His fingers danced across the keys, and the melody that filled the church was the same one they had created together all those years ago. It was as if the music had always been waiting for them, waiting for the moment when they would find each other again. Clara closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, letting it carry her back to a time when love was pure, when dreams were limitless, when their hearts had been one. She felt the warmth of his presence beside her, and for the first time in so many years, she felt whole again. The song was not just a memory, it was their song, the song that had been born from their love, and now it would always be theirs. And in that moment, Clara knew that some melodies never truly fade. They linger, echoing through the heart, carrying with them the hope of reunion, of forgiveness, and of love that endures beyond time. Chapter 7: The Silence Between the Notes. The church bell rang once, twice, its sound a distant echo in the quiet town. Clara sat beside Samuel, her fingers tracing the edge of the old piano, as though she could still feel the imprint of their past in its keys. They had spoken little since the moment he had returned to the music, both lost in the waves of sound that filled the church. The melody lingered in the air, soft and haunting, as if it were the very spirit of their love, the soul of the years they had shared, and the years they had lost. As the last note faded, Samuel's fingers hovered over the keys, and the silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but rather pregnant with meaning. It was as though they were both waiting for something to break the stillness between them. Clara had so many questions, so many things she wanted to say, but she found herself unable to speak, the weight of emotions too heavy to articulate. Instead, she simply watched him, studying the lines of his face, the way the light caught his features as he sat before her. Time had changed him, but in some ways, he was still the same. His eyes, still as warm as she remembered, still held the same depth, the same yearning that mirrored her own. Samuel exhaled slowly, and the soft sound of his breath broke the silence. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Not a day went by that I didn't wonder what could have been, Clara." Clara felt the knot in her chest tighten, but she refused to let herself cry. Instead, she looked at him, searching his face for the truth that had eluded her for so long. "And yet you left," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the question hanging in the air between them like an unspoken truth. Samuel nodded, his eyes closing as if the weight of her words were too much to bear. "I had no choice. There were things I couldn't control, things I couldn't explain. I was part of a world that was too far gone. I didn't want you to get caught in it, Clara. I didn't want to drag you down with me." Clara shook her head, her heart breaking all over again. "But you didn't trust me enough to tell me, to let me choose whether to stay or leave. You kept me in the dark, Samuel. You let me believe that I wasn't worth your fight." His eyes opened, and there was a depth of regret there, something she had longed to see for years. "I know, and I'm sorry. I never wanted you to feel that way. But the truth was, I couldn't bear the thought of you getting caught in my storm. I thought I was doing the right thing, but in doing so, I made a mistake that I'll never be able to undo." Clara's heart wavered between the anger she had held onto for so long and the tenderness that still lingered in the corners of her soul. She wanted to be angry, wanted to shout at him for abandoning her, for leaving without a word. But she couldn't. The love she had for him, the love that had never truly gone away, was too strong, too overwhelming to let the bitterness take hold. "I spent years trying to understand why you left," she said, her voice shaking. "I tried to move on, to let go of the past, but it always felt like something was missing, like there was a hole in my heart that I couldn't fill. And now I understand that it wasn't just the absence of you, Samuel. It was the absence of the music we made together, the music that was ours." Samuel's gaze softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing hers once more. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her, and she couldn't help but close her eyes for a moment, as though she could lose herself in the feeling of being near him again. "I never stopped playing, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I played every day, trying to hold on to what we had. I played for us, for the love we shared, and for the years that were taken from us." Clara nodded, the tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. "I know. I heard it sometimes, in my dreams, in the quiet moments when I would close my eyes. I would hear you playing, and I would feel you beside me, as if you were still there." Samuel's face crumpled with the pain of her words. He pulled his hand away and placed it over his heart, as if trying to hold back the storm of emotions that threatened to engulf him. "I didn't know how to come back," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I didn't know how to face you after everything that had happened. I thought you had moved on, that you had found a life without me. I thought I had lost you forever." Clara wiped the tears from her cheeks, feeling a sense of resolve growing within her. "I never moved on. Not really. Not in the way that you think. I tried, yes, but there was always something that kept me tethered to you. And when I found those letters, when I heard the music again, I realized that I never really let go. I never really stopped loving you." The room fell into a heavy silence once more, but this time it was different. It wasn't a silence filled with unresolved questions or the weight of unspoken words. It was a silence filled with understanding, with a quiet acceptance that perhaps their love had not been lost after all. Samuel stood and walked slowly to the window, his gaze falling upon the town below. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape, and for a moment Clara saw the man she had once known, young, full of dreams, and filled with the promise of a future they would build together. "Do you ever wonder," Samuel said, his voice distant, "what would have happened if we had just stayed? If I had told you everything, if we had faced the storm together?" Clara stood and walked toward him, her heart aching with the weight of the question. "I think about it all the time," she said softly, "but I also know that we can't change the past. All we have is now, and I can't spend any more time wondering about what could have been." He turned to her then, his eyes searching hers, and in that moment she saw it, the same longing, the same love that had never truly died. The music, the silence, the years between them, they had all led them here, to this place, to this moment. "Then what now?" Samuel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Clara smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with a sense of peace she had not felt in years. Now we make the music again." And with that, she reached for him, her fingers brushing against his, and for the first time in a long time, they were no longer two separate souls lost in the quiet of their own lives. They were one, their hearts beating in time with the rhythm of the music that had once defined their love, and would now, once again, define their future. Chapter 8: Echoes Through the Rain. The storm rolled in just after midnight. Clara sat by the window of her childhood bedroom, the very room she had left behind all those years ago, and watched as the rain began to fall in gentle rhythms against the glass. The old tree outside, gnarled and patient, stood exactly where it always had, though age had bowed its branches. Lightning, fleeting and pale, danced across the clouds before surrendering to the night again. Her fingers rested lightly on the window pane. The storm, she thought, wasn't loud enough to drown memory, nor soft enough to soothe it. Earlier that evening, she and Samuel had walked the winding lanes of the town, silent at first, letting the sounds of their steps and the evening breeze speak in place of words. There was no need to rush, no urgency. The past had unraveled itself slowly, painfully, and with it came a fragile kind of healing, not through explanation, but through shared silence, through music, through being present at last. And yet, memory always had its way of finding corners where light still didn't reach. Now, in the solitude of her room, she thought of the letters again, the ones she had found in the attic, the ones she hadn't yet shown him. They had been written in a hand that trembled slightly, his, and they held not only melodies written in words, but also confessions and longing and love that had survived only in ink and yellowed pages. One letter in particular she had folded into her journal. The last one. The one dated 5 years ago, when he believed she had married and moved away. She hadn't. She had built a quiet life, a small one. Taught music in the city, wrote articles for journals, played in cafes where no one knew her name. It had been enough for a while, but not forever. She drew the letter from her drawer now and ran her thumb across the paper. The rain fell harder, as if urging her to finally open her heart the same way the sky had opened itself to weep. By morning, the storm had softened to a drizzle. She found Samuel in the chapel again. This time, he wasn't playing. He stood by the stained glass window, looking out as the soft rain tapped gently on the stone. When he turned to her, his expression carried both surprise and calm, as if he had been waiting for her, but had not dared to hope. "I couldn't sleep," Clara said simply. "Me neither," he replied. "Old memories don't sleep easily, do they?" "No," she whispered, stepping toward him. She held the letter in her hand, folded neatly. "I found this in the attic. It's yours." He took it slowly, as if afraid it might disintegrate with time. His fingers hesitated on the crease. "I remember this. I never sent it." "I know." He read it in silence. Each word pulled something from the space between them, a fear, a doubt, a regret. By the time he finished, his shoulders had lowered and his voice had gone hollow. "I wrote this the day I thought I had lost you completely. I saw your name on a program, listed as Clara Devereaux. I thought it was a married name. I thought I was too late." Clara's heart softened. "It was just my mother's name. I took it back after she passed. I was never married, Samuel." The room grew still, holding its breath with them. He looked up at her slowly. "You weren't." "No." Her voice cracked, and she shook her head. "I couldn't love someone else the way I loved you, even when I tried. I suppose a part of me was still waiting." He stepped closer, each step deliberate. The air between them shimmered with something fragile and deep. Not just love, but the understanding of time lost, and the desperate hope that it might yet be found again. "Clara," he said, her name like a note played just right. "We can't rewrite the years, but maybe we can still compose something new." A tear escaped down her cheek, warm despite the chill of the chapel. "I don't want to relive the past, Samuel. I want to create something better." He reached for her hand then, carefully, reverently, and she let him. Their fingers entwined with the ease of two melodies finding harmony after a long and painful rest. Outside, the rain began to slow. Drops fell with the rhythm of a soft lullaby, no longer grieving but cleansing. Samuel looked to the piano, then back at her. "Play with me?" She nodded. They sat side by side, like they once had, only now they brought with them not the innocence of first love, but the gravity of a love that had endured silence, space, and sorrow. Their fingers moved gently, weaving old notes with new phrases, improvising, listening, responding, not just to the keys, but to each other. The music they made was unlike anything before. It didn't strive for perfection. It lived in the pauses, in the breath between notes. It carried the sound of years past and hopes reborn. When they finished, neither spoke. The final chord hung in the air for a long moment, shimmering in its stillness, until it faded into the echoes of the rain beyond the chapel walls. That night, Clara wrote in her journal, "Music does not mourn time lost. It simply waits. And when played again, when heard with open ears and open hearts, it returns, not as it was, but as it is meant to be, deeper, richer, more true." And the piano in the chapel, long silent in memory, had found its voice again. Chapter 9. The Sound Between the Notes. Morning in Marrow's End was unlike morning anywhere else. It had a hush to it, a reverence, as if the world held its breath in the first moments after waking, waiting to see if the day would be gentle or demanding. Clara walked through the town square in that fragile hush, her coat drawn tight, her fingers still carrying the warmth of last night's final chord with Samuel. There had been no need for promises between them. The music had said everything. But the days ahead, she knew, would require more than music. They would need truth, closure, and courage. She paused before the weathered gate of the old Devereaux house. It stood quiet, proud in its disrepair, like an aging actress who once commanded the stage and now watched the world with patient dignity. The house had been part of her for so long, its halls echoing with footsteps of memory, its silence heavy with stories untold. Today she had come to open one of those silences. Inside, the attic waited. The scent of dust and cedar greeted her as she climbed the narrow staircase. Sunlight filtered through the small round window, catching on the motes in the air like golden snow. Everything was as it had been, boxes stacked high, old photographs curled at the edges, her grandfather's metronome lying silent atop a sheet of forgotten compositions. She walked to the chest she hadn't dared open in years, the one marked with her mother's name in faded ink. Gently, she lifted the lid. Inside were letters, journals, and a few newspaper clippings. One headline caught her eye: Local pianist to debut original work at summer recital. It featured a younger version of Clara's mother, head bowed over a grand piano, smile quiet but certain. Clara unfolded one of the letters addressed to her mother in a neat, tidy script, Samuel's handwriting. My dearest Eleanor, she plays like you, perhaps even more vulnerably. You told me once that emotion was both a gift and a burden. Clara wears it like a second skin. I fear I've hurt her, but I couldn't stay. I hope one day she understands. A sharp breath caught in Clara's throat. Samuel had written to her mother, confided in her. And her mother, it seemed, had kept every word. Digging deeper, Clara found her own letters, ones she'd written in anger as a teenager and never sent. Some were torn at the edges, smudged with tears or ink. The weight of all that silence pressed on her. She had spent years blaming Samuel for leaving, but perhaps her mother had played her own part, shielding Clara from what she thought was pain, or protecting a future she didn't trust Samuel to give. It didn't matter anymore, not in the way it once did. Clara gathered the letters carefully and returned to the chapel that afternoon. Samuel was there, tuning the piano. He looked up as she entered, eyes warm. You're early. I found something, she said, approaching him. She handed over the letters without a word. He opened one, skimmed it, and stilled. His breath left him slowly. I never thought I'd see these again, he said softly. I wrote them after I left. I didn't know where else to turn. Your mother, she never replied, but she never returned them either. She kept them, Clara said, watching him closely. She must have believed you deserved to be remembered. A long silence settled between them. Not the kind that came from uncertainty, but from the sheer weight of shared understanding. Grief, regret, forgiveness, they didn't always arrive in order or neatly. I think she wanted me to make peace with you in my own time, Clara said. She knew I wasn't ready then. And are you now? He asked, not looking at her, but at the piano. I am. He nodded. They sat at the piano once more, but this time Clara placed a new sheet of music on the stand. It wasn't one of Samuel's old pieces. It was hers. Your composition? He asked, eyebrows raised. She smiled faintly. I wrote it after I came back. It's called The Sound Between the Notes. It's unfinished. He studied the staves, the delicate pencil marks across them. Would you like me to help finish it? She looked at him, this man who had been her first love, her first heartbreak, and perhaps her first and last duet. I'd like us to write it together. And so they began. Note by note, line by line, they shaped something new. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a revival of the past. It was something wholly theirs, born from years of silence and shaped by years of growth. The music rose in soft, aching tones, not dramatic, not loud, but honest. Honest in a way only time could allow. The chapel didn't need an audience. The world didn't need to know. But within those walls, with the winter sun casting gentle light across the piano keys, Clara and Samuel wrote not only music, but the next chapter of their lives. And as the last note hung in the air, Clara closed her eyes and listened. Not just to the melody, but to the sound between the notes. Chapter 10, The Last Note. The first rain of spring arrived in Merrow's End the way a lullaby finishes, with quiet certainty, not with fanfare. It traced the chapel windows in soft lines, as though the sky itself were playing its own ballad, slow and reflective. Clara sat on the bench in front of the grand piano, her fingertips resting lightly on the keys, not playing yet, just listening. The concert was tonight. Not a grand affair. No velvet curtains or golden chandeliers. Just a community gathering in the chapel that had once stood abandoned, now gently restored by the hands of memory and healing. The pews had been polished. Candles would be lit. And for the first time in decades, music would rise from this place, not in mourning, but in celebration. And she would be the one to play it. Samuel stepped in quietly behind her, carrying a thermos of tea in one hand and her grandmother's shawl in the other. He draped it over her shoulders without a word, his hands lingering just a second longer than necessary. "She used to wear this before every recital," Clara said, smiling softly. She believed it brought her clarity. "She was right," Samuel replied. "You look whole." Clara turned to him, studying the lines of his face, the silver at his temples, the calm behind his eyes. The boy she had loved had grown into a man shaped by seasons and silence, but he was still music, still hers in some unspoken way. "I finished the piece," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Without me?" She nodded. "It had to end with my note, but your harmony is in every bar." He smiled, not with nostalgia, but with quiet pride. Outside, the townspeople began arriving. Clara could hear laughter, the shuffling of chairs, the low buzz of reunion. Familiar faces from her youth, and kind strangers who'd only known her as the woman with the piano now came together beneath a roof that had heard both heartbreak and healing. As dusk descended, the candles were lit. The room glowed with gold. And Clara stepped up to the piano. She bowed slightly to the crowd, simple, sincere. No flourishes, no mask, just herself. Then she sat, centered her hands, and began to play the sound between the notes. The music opened gently, like a breath, a memory. Melodies threaded with longing, with return. There were pauses where silence spoke louder than sound, where time itself seemed to lean in and listen. The notes she played weren't perfect, but they were true. Every phrase was a step back through her life, through the attic, the lake, the letters, the long years of aching. And then came the final passage. It was unlike anything she'd ever composed, simple, stripped bare. It held no grandeur, only peace. A musical goodbye, not to Samuel or to the past, but to the part of herself that had once been lost. The last note lingered, hung, then dissolved into the stillness. The room did not erupt in applause at first. There was a hush, sacred, wide-eyed. Some blinked back tears. Others simply sat, still wrapped in the echoes of what they'd just heard. Then, slowly, the applause rose, not as performance praise, but as gratitude. For the music. For her. For all that had finally been said without words. Samuel met her at the edge of the stage. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Clara reached for his hand. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds had broken apart like curtains, and the stars stepped onto the sky's dark stage, shimmering and patient. "I'm not staying," Clara said softly as they walked into the night. "I didn't ask you to." "I know," she said, turning to face him, "but I'll come back. Often. This town, this chapel, it's not just about the past anymore. It's where I found my voice." Samuel smiled, brushing a raindrop from her cheek. "And if one day," she continued, "I find that my music needs a second verse, I'll write it here." They stood together under the chapel eaves, the lanterns casting warm halos across the wet cobblestone. In that moment, Clara knew love didn't always end with a kiss, a promise, or a song. Sometimes it simply found its place, quietly, faithfully, between the notes of one life and another. She didn't need to chase the past anymore. She had become the melody, and it was enough.